Sommer, and in this session we're going to talk about closing cost concessions. So in my video about how much it costs to buy a home, we talked from the perspective of using a loan to buy the home that closing costs are about 3% of the purchase price. Of course, that's a generality and it's going to vary depending on the price of your home and what you use to buy the home and various factors like that, but about 3%. About 1.5% of the purchase price goes to pay the lender for the efforts that they do in allowing you to secure the loan to buy the home. And about 1.5% goes to the title and escrow companies for the work that they do in helping the property be ready for transfer and facilitating the transaction. So what do we do with that 3%? Now again, this 3% is separate than the down payment that goes to the lender for the loan. This is the 3% upfront costs that are just related to those services that help the transaction happen on the front end. Closing cost concessions can go either way. The buyer can pay for the seller's closing costs, or the seller can pay for the buyer's closing costs. More typically, we see the seller giving some or an entire portion of the buyer's closing costs being paid for out of the seller's proceeds. So effectively, closing cost concessions, seller to buyer, are a reduction of the total proceeds that the seller received from the transaction. Because we have the initial purchase price, we deduct out those costs that the seller is going to incur through the transaction, and then we get the net sales price. So if we add in closing costs, we reduce the sales price to the seller. Now, this can be an acceptable thing for the seller as it can facilitate the transaction. There may be a buyer who is an excellent buyer but just doesn't have the upfront cash or wants to use that cash for something else, so the seller will agree to help pay for those costs to make the transaction happen. Closing cost concessions are monies that are received through the settlement statement. They aren't actual cash handed from the seller to the buyer. It is more of a settlement statement deduction as to where cash comes from and goes to within the transaction. Now, if it is a really hot market and there are multiple offers on the table, a buyer may choose to effectively increase the purchase price of their offer by offering to pay the seller's closing costs. So they might be using a loan and have a limitation of what they expect the property to appraise for, and for that reason they might want to limit how much they offer in total purchase price, but effectively allow the seller to walk away with a higher net by paying for those closing costs in that direction. So you can see it really can go either way, and closing cost concessions, again, they are separate from the down payment. The down payment on a purchase is what goes to the lender as a token to say that this is my initial payment towards paying off my loan for purchasing this property, but down payments really don't affect the seller other than proving to the seller that you can get the loan to purchase this property. So closing cost concessions are effectively a deduction of the purchase price. This is important to remember because if you submit a full price offer but ask for a whole lot in closing cost concessions, do know that you have effectively reduced your offer price by about that same percentage. Again, there's positives and negatives on each side of the story as to why they might be acceptable for the transaction. And so just keep all of those things in mind. Be sure that you're working with an agent who is understanding the market, knows the details of this property well, understands how appraisals work and how those closing cost concessions might be considered by an appraiser as they're determining the value of the property. Our public records will note whether closing cost concessions were part of the transaction, and it can be used when you're looking at past recent sales that are similar to the property that you're looking at or the property that you're trying to sell to see if closing cost concessions are a normal part of acceptable offers within the market at this time. So if you have any additional questions on this or anything else related to buying or selling real estate here in the great grand state of Arizona, specifically the greater Phoenix metro area, by all means, please give me a call, a text, an email, or hit me up on my Facebook page. I'll be happy to connect with you and answer all of your questions.